I am super jazzed for no pun intended. I'm super jazzed for this episode because I love the person we're talking about. So let's get into it. Greetings and welcome to Ill Repute, the podcast about women and women first. I am Sovereign Syre, a writer, comedian, a person that believes you should be able to ride a moose. It should be a thing.
I won't say with certainty. I think there is certainly in the realm of probability someone, if not a small subculture of moose riding individuals who would have a Wikipedia of things to say.
I would think so. And then when I bring this,
I would love to browse it.
I was like, there've got to be some native tribes that are in the area that have a relationship with moose as game and whatnot. And surely amongst them, there must have been at least one that rode a moose. and then I go and look and people are like, are you fucking crazy?
Absolutely. Well, I am Ela Darling, who cannot follow that. A VR pioneer, former librarian, and I'm a lady who's fresh and ready to start the year off right. We're recording this on the 2nd of January, 2024, which for me is the first, because yesterday was a bank holiday, so that doesn't count.
Yeah, if money doesn't move, then nothing matters.
Neither do I. Now, we here at Ill Repute support women's rights.
But more importantly, we support women's wrongs.
And which women's wrongs are we righting today?
I'm going to give you a hint here.
Her signature laugh.
It's my real laugh, and I often laugh. And if everybody laughed that way, they'd be healthier.
What an iconic laugh that woman has.
That's right, folks. Phyllis motherfucking Diller. I had told several people I was doing an episode about her, and all of them, their first thing was, ah, ha, 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 ha. Like, immediate reaction. Like, that was her trademark. So, with that start, let us begin.
Part 1. The Unhappy Homemaker. Phyllis Ada Driver was born in Lima, Ohio on July 17th, 1917. So she's a Cancer. Early in her pregnancy, her mother had missed several periods, and her doctor told her that it was a tumor. It wasn't until she underwent an operation that they realized the tumor was in fact a baby girl. She was unexpected and an only child. Her father was 55 and her mother was 38 when she was born.
What a way to enter the world. It's cancer.
No, it's a cancer.
So her parents were hands-off when it came to raising her. One of her earliest memories is her mother setting her down on a pillow in the corner of the living room and telling her not to move while her mother just went out to run errands. Another time, she was sent to the store with a purse of money and a shopping list. And when she returned home empty-handed, her mother went with her back to the store and discovered it was closed. Phyllis was 2.
Wow.
Can you imagine someone sending their 2-year-old to the corner store to get you cigs?
Most parents I know don't want to leave their 2-year-old alone, unsupervised in a room for the length of time it takes to smoke a cigarette.
I mean, I grew up in the ghetto, young baby child cries. Parents there wouldn't do that. And it was all single moms that were doing all kinds of weird to try to juggle childcare. And even in those scenarios, no one would hand, hey, a 6-year-old maybe, but a 2-year-old, I mean, there's a line, okay?
Yeah.
How to do just handing a note, can I have cigarettes? Here's the money. Just I'm trying to imagine that interaction. Just or a 2-year-old comes in with its mother's purse and walks around and slowly collects items and then walks up to the counter.
I'm imagining her at 2 in a diaper and too much lipstick, trying to, in her mom's oversized high heels because my brain wants to turn it into something cute and not tragic.
So this has lots of of links. So let us look at another video.
Make a comic, you have to suffer some kind of an abandonment or loss or lack in childhood. Yeah, I was raised on fear all my life.
I have many interview clips to share in this one because fascinating woman. So she loved when she was finally old enough to go to school because she was finally surrounded by people, namely like other kids. She was a teacher's pet. She was already a good musician. She had been playing piano since she was in a high chair. Her mom did have occasional like ambitions for her. Like her mom went and saw a band and saw a female playing the saxophone and went and bought Phyllis a saxophone and brought it home, and Phyllis learned how to play it. So there was some ambition in the house. The other thing is that her mom was super religious and like believed in the Bible as it was written. Her and her dad didn't. Like her and her dad were both like atheists and skeptics, but like she did grow up in a house with a mom that like seriously believed that everything in the Bible like happened as stated. She got really good grades and that helped her stand out. But she also stood out because she was incredibly skinny. Like nurses would send her home with notes begging her mom to feed her, which kind of started in Phyllis this complex about her looks. And it was something that she would feel self-conscious about for like the rest of her life. And it's like a huge part of her persona and who she was this ambivalent relationship to her looks.
When Phyllis was 9, she was staying at her uncle's farm. Her mother came to see her, and Phyllis climbed into the car and turned it on. The car was in gear, and she was trapped in the car, and it took off. It wreaked havoc on the farm before she hit a post and was slammed into the windshield, breaking her nose. Her parents treated her broken nose with a piece of steak because they were afraid of the medical costs.
This is a quote from Phyllis from her memoir, Lampshade in a Whorehouse. Nobody ever told me I was ugly. I just didn't like my looks. I had the long driver nose, and being broken meant that it was nearly as crooked as my teeth. Since my parents didn't want to spend the money to get any of this fixed, and being that I never felt as well dressed as other kids, I had a major problem, a full-time complex that followed me around. And here's some bits.
My mother never even told me about sex. She figured with my looks I'd never get that far.
I was just so ugly. Oh, I don't know how to tell you. I wore a choke chain till I was 12. My own Ouija board told me to go to hell. A peeping Tom threw up on my windowsill.
So she really took this complex that she developed and made it into material. Like she made money off of her trauma, which is the best thing you can do with trauma other than not have it.
Yeah, like she really, and that kind of becomes the theme of her life, is her ability to take shit and turn it into shinola, basically. Yeah. So her mother arranged for her to go to Chicago to the Chicago Sherwood Conservatory of Music right out of high school. So again, her mom, there was a support there for her to be a creative person, right? And she often described her mom as sort of like cold and distant, but that she still felt very loved by her, but that her mom just wasn't mom material. So she was like a good friend, but didn't have the nurturing and affection that like would normally be associated with mothering and motherhood.
Right.
So she ends up at this conservatory right out of high school. So she's young. She's like 17, 18 years old. And she ended up with several au pair type gigs until the sexual harassment from the husbands became too much, after which point she got work as a cashier in the cafeteria at the YMCA and was able to get her own apartment. And her memoir actually it opens with her being sexually assaulted by the father of a child she's watching, and her calling her mom and her parents telling her just like not to tell anybody. And she opened it going like, and that was my life.
Her recitals at the conservatory were always standing room only. Her shtick was playing songs, then stopping to make quips, and everyone thought she was hilarious because she was. She spent 3 years in Chicago, dating and going to jazz clubs, but she realized as talented as she wasn't talented enough to make it as a musician. So she went back home and got her scholarship for a liberal arts college where she could learn to be a teacher.
And like, this is kind of like a devastating thing. I went to performing arts high school. Like I was a ballerina, and it's always like a really tough moment when you realize that as much as you love a thing and as good as you are at the thing, when you go to a school and you're surrounded by other people also doing the thing, and there can be a moment when you recognize that like this can always be a great hobby for me, but like I can't compete at this level. And man, that's really painful. It is like a really painful thing. But like, you know, we're both creative people, and like the life of being an artist is a lot of times, you know, looking at like sweat equity and kind of not falling into the trap of the fallacy of time spent investing needs to result in the exact sunk cost fallacy. Yeah, there it is. It was on the tip of my tongue.
My TED Talk was sort of a veiled like discussion about sunk cost fallacy. So yeah, eventually you realize that you kind of got to cut your losses and find something that is going to work. But that doesn't negate the value of that time spent.
And thank God that she made that decision, because she would have toiled away being second chair maybe forever. Mm-hmm. And instead she became the first stand-up comedian to become a household name. Sometimes it's good to be able to have an honest self-assessment and go like, am I like, maybe I need to go create my own lane. Yeah. So this school was a Mennonite school, and like her mother, most of the students believed that every part of the Bible happened as it was written. And so she kind of rebelled against that. She thought the other students were stupid. She got in trouble at school for like streaking, for smoking. She thought the students were a joke. She was staunchly atheist at this point, and was basically just trying to like show off. She was being kind of a brat. And it was kind of a loss at the school. Like it's like she wasn't going to fit in. But luckily or unluckily for her, she met a guy named Milburn Diller, who set her up with his older brother, Sherwood Diller.
Milburn and Sherwood are names that have fallen out of time. And what good ones they are. I can't wait until they make a comeback.
Yeah. The thing to understand about his family is they had been wealthy, and then the dad had unalived himself, and there were some scandals. And so they were actually very like cash poor, but still kind of had put on, and she goes into detail describing this. It's really, really funny and bizarre. Like it sounds like all of them were kind of a little agoraphobic. None of them worked, but there also wasn't money, because they kind of still suffered from these delusions of being like temporarily distressed nobility. And this is going to be a huge problem in the marriage, like as they go on.
I cannot imagine marrying into that. But she fell in lust at first sight, which, that always works out for you. He was visiting from California and had big city energy. She describes losing her virginity to him as being a matter of not being able to fight him off, and that she wasn't impressed. Her enjoyment didn't seem of his concern, and soon it wasn't of hers either.
Yeah. Later in her book, she describes when the term date rape became a thing in like the 70s and 80s. And she was like, by that measure, I was date raped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times by my husband. So yeah, like not fun. But it's not like her and her mom were having like big open dialogues about what is normal and not normal. And of course there was that whole phone call home and them saying, just don't tell anybody. So Sherry, as Sherwood was called, was a big talker. He had lots of ideas, but little follow through. He thought he was going to be a millionaire, though he dropped out of 2 colleges and had sold the car his mother bought him to pay for his return home. And it was his mother's car and money that were used to take Phyllis out. But she was 20 and in love. And man, haven't we all been there?
Oh, God. Yeah. Too many times to count.
There's like every red flag is in play. You're like, it's so pretty.
Phyllis got pregnant almost immediately. and dropped out of school to avoid the shame. Her and Sherwood eloped in Kentucky, and she changed the date on the wedding certificate before showing it to her mother so she wouldn't know she hadn't been a virgin when she got. Sherwood rented out a barn and opened a business selling fluorescent lighting when it was new, and he invented indirect fluorescent lighting, which started to sell very well.
No. Yeah.
That sounds kind of cool.
While his business had the potential to be very big, it failed due to his laziness. Something's just feeling very familiar to me. She said he had a high IQ, but it was useless because he was delusional. Sherwood ran the business with his brother Milburn, but the brothers would just sit around all day. They had never worked in their lives. So the business inevitably failed. And that's kind of, she talks about this like consistent theme of like, he's very smart, has great ideas. He can have everything in his lap. All he has to do is lift a finger to help himself, and he won't do it. And so then everything goes to shit. So invents indirect fluorescent lighting. He could have been a millionaire right there. All he had to do was actually work. And so she kind of describes this thing where him and his brother would just like sit in the office all day, like a sketch from Kids in the Hall or something about businessmen. Just like, what meetings shall we take today? And just like this kind of useless, weird satire of what they thought businessmen did. But they didn't think businessmen worked. This is already going to be like an incredibly frustrating situation.
Like little kids grabbing a briefcase and filling it with paper and their favorite crayons.
Yes. Yeah. And then sitting in an office and acting like CEOs, like what they thought they did all day. So the business failed, but Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And Sherwood found work at a bomber plant in Michigan because suddenly they needed to employ a lot of people really fast to, make bombers.
Over 3 years, he worked his way up to being an inspector. She did everything around the house. His allergy to work was so severe that none of their cabinets or drawers had knobs. She didn't know how to fit them, and he refused to do so. They just needed to claw open the drawers and cabinets. It's like, it takes you less than a minute. I just did it yesterday. It takes you less than a minute, and yet that minute of his time spent is not worth saving the extra 30 seconds for everybody else in the household every time they have to use the damn thing.
That was just a thing that it was small but really stood out to me in the book, where I was like, that's pathological. That's people talk about this a lot on TikTok, and like they're talking about it more and more in marriages, is this idea of men engaged in weaponized incompetence. Where it's like, well, I don't know how to do it. And so it'll be women that'll be like, if I send him to the store with a list, like if it's not on that list, like he's not going to get it. And if they don't have it, he won't know what to do. And like,
there's no initiative. They have to be, it's like to be equal partners in terms of splitting housework and household labor. It's impossible because the one partner always has to be in a managerial position, assigning, delegating, making sure that the list has everything on, because they can't be fucked to look around their home and see, like, usually there's this in the fridge and it's not there right now. Usually there's dishes, but there's a really gross smelling sink full of them. I should let her know about that, you know?
Yeah.
I don't have any clean underwear, and when are you going to fix that? Because I don't know how to use the washing machine. Last time I tried, I really messed it up. Is almost a threat that, like, if you try to make me do it, I'll mess it up again.
Yeah.
You just do such a better job than I do.
And so you can see how this is like, and this is just starting. They're just starting. They're just starting their life together. So she did want to have kids, though. Like, she really wanted to be a mom, and she felt like that's, what you're supposed to do once you got married, and like that's where she would find fulfillment. So she kind of took it for granted that maybe everyone's, that marriage is just miserable for everybody. Like, it's just, this is the way it is, which, familiar. So she had 6 kids with him, 1 that was stillborn. She describes a marriage where she was alone most of the time. She says that she felt like a trampoline he would jump on for a few hours and then she'd be pregnant, Once, when she was in labor,
Christ.
Sherwood refused to accompany her to the hospital until a neighbor convinced him that he needed to go. She described him as, quote unquote, cruel and brutal. But, like, can you imagine? Because when it's not that she just was, like, the first real female stand-up comic and that was an obstacle. Like, there's going to be a lot of obstacles that have nothing to do with her gender. And, like,
Right.
that to say, like, oh, she was a trailblazer is almost superficial, like, in terms of an accomplishment compared to the situation she ends up, like, rising out of in this marriage.
One of their children, Sally, started to have developmental delays. Her husband didn't care and left her to take care of everything. After work, he would come home and put on a suit and go down to the local cafe and smoke and drink coffee. Wow, how nice for him. He was obsessed with putting on a show like he was still old money, though the money had dried up a long time ago. With the war winding down, Sherwood put in a transfer to the naval base in Alameda, California. As soon as they got there, he lost his job and then went through 17 more in the next year.
That is a level of, that's pathological. Like, that's beyond laziness. Like, I think this guy had, like, actual, like, mental health issues.
17 in a year sounds like you realize that if you get someone to hire you, the first 2 weeks are training. The next 2 weeks, they're still figuring things out. And then you've got about 6 weeks there that you can completely off before they realize that they have to fire you. And then you just find someone else to do the same thing.
Yeah. And I think that kind of was his, like, I wasn't even married to him, and reading through the book, there were so many moments where I just, like, wanted to throw the book across the room because I was like, what the fuck? Like, the whole thing about going down to the cafe and putting on a suit to read the paper to, like, pretend that he's, like, a man of leisure or an intellectual.
He still has to go perform and play pretend. Meanwhile, his wife is running a household and raising all of their kids.
And clawing the drawers open with, like, I know what she's talking about. I've been in apartments before where there was just no handle. And it's like, like, that visual just really, I was like, man, like, being that person and then watching your husband come home and put on a suit for someone else and then go out and spend hours away from the house to put on a show for who? For whomst?
And spend money on coffee and whatever the fuck he's smoking, cigarettes or cigars or whatever. Those aren't free either.
Yeah. So she sought escape through the church, even though she was an atheist. She would sing in the choir, and it gave her a creative outlet and a chance to socialize with other people. It was during this time that she started directing and creating shows, and she was really good at it. So she started, quote unquote, working the church circuit, where she was doing stand-up and musical sketches. Phyllis Diller actually came out of, like, the Christian comedy market before it existed and was a staunch atheist. Like, there's something to me, like, it's, like, very cute about that, where she's like, but it was a place to be social. Like,
yeah, humans just seek community where they can find it.
Like, and this happens a lot in her life where she kind of becomes this emergent leader. Like, she's very much resistant to the call. And, like, that's a big thing that she has to get over. And then when she does, it's like, holy shit. The trajectory of her career was, like, rocket fuel. It was crazy.
A pivotal moment came when Phyllis's father passed away. Her mother sold the house and moved everything to California to save Phyllis. She bought a Victorian house that was split into apartments and gave it to Phyllis. Her mother lived with them, and they rented out the units, which gave Phyllis money for the bills with cash left over. Her mother had come to California with one mission: to get rid of Sherwood. Phyllis had just given birth to another daughter, Stephanie. However, her mother couldn't convince Phyllis to leave. She wasn't ready yet, and soon her mother passed away. Now Phyllis really was in the world by herself. And God,
I mean,
man.
Having been in abusive situations, it's so hard when you're not ready. You know,
Yes.
it's just really hard and especially when there are things keeping you there, like friendships, children, real estate. Yeah.
Finance.
And it's like, you really have to be ready to leave. And especially if you have children with the person, it's like, you've got to also think about how that's going to play out with the kids and wanting the best for them. So this is a quote from Phyllis. My inheritance included the 55-acre PM Driver National Highway farm in Beaver Dam, Ohio, and 30 grand in cash. So our money worries should have been over. But, of course, Sherwood couldn't wait to move to a better neighborhood. I don't care what you give people like him, they're going to be broke within a week. And people like me are dumb enough to do whatever it takes to make people like him happy. Unquote. That's like...
Every part of this, I feel so caught.
I knew you
know?
would. That's why I was like, there's things we need to talk about. like we need to talk about her early life because women are going to hear this. And I think every woman will identify with having been in a relationship with someone like this. You know, how long they stayed is a different matter. But like, you know, the charismatic loser person is a very strong archetype to resist, especially if you have like any kind of codependency, because you believe their lies. They're lying to themselves, and then you believe their lies. I'm going to be a millionaire.
And then you start lying for them because otherwise you have to admit that you've been fucking duped and strung along this whole time.
I'm a genius.
Yeah.
I'm a genius. I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm going to be a general. I'm going to be the deputy. I'm going to be a professor. I'm going to be the chair of the thing. Like that kind of, you know, pathological confidence and then nothing to back it up. And then it's like, and then you end up doing a lot of things to cover for them to save face. It's a very toxic and magnetic combination that anxious and avoidant attachment kind of style is people are very, very strongly compelled to each other. It's very hard to pull apart.
I think the phrase you used previously was they get along like a house on fire.
Yep. And then burn everything down.
This is a quote from Phyllis. Instead of getting an ordinary job like everyone else, my husband was always working on some product that he envisioned earning him trillions. He would spend hours smoking and drinking coffee while working on these harebrained schemes, and he'd do so in front of me and the kids. Meanwhile, every one of those kids' birth certificates listed their father's career as publisher.
I think we've all been with this guy, or at least dated him. So things went on this way for the next 3 years, with Sherwood getting a job in a real estate office where he was great at sales, except he wouldn't show houses. Then he got a job selling freezers at Sears right when they came out. However, soon enough, Sherwood had run through all of her inheritance, and his sales job was not enough to keep 5 kids and a house together. And she knew that she had to get a job, even though she already fucking had one, which is mom of 5 fucking kids and a husband.
Not to mention, just maintaining the household without children. She answered an ad looking for a paperboy. The editor told her that the job was for a man, but recommended her to another paper that was looking for a writer for the women's pages. She got a job writing for the paper at $75 a week. She was now the women's editor at the San Leandro News Observer, but it soon ended when a man at the paper made it his mission to get rid of her. Perhaps out of jealousy of how well her columns were doing, he got her stripped down to doing the movie schedules, and she finally quit. But she learned to type, and she had started to hone her writing style.
And so this is like another thing that she's going to deal with a lot, is she gets in someplace, she performs and demonstrates excellence, and is then rewarded for it by the wrath of men around her. So next, she found work at Kahn's department store doing advertising for radio and newspaper. She excelled. She thought outside the box. She used more white space in ads, and she was just really good at her job. She was slowly developing all the skills that she would need to make her an icon.
During this time, she came across a book in a client's office that she claims changed her life, called The Magic of Believing. The Magic of Believing is a self-help and personal development book written by Claude M. Bristol. First published in 1948, it has become a classic in the genre and continues to be widely read and referenced today. The book focuses on the power of belief and the impact of positive thinking on a person's life and success.
The best thing I received was out of this book, The Magic of Believing by Claude Bristol. I read the book, and it's a system of thought, and it's something there's a system in this book that if you use it and you do it, it works. But most people just read the book and put it aside. I read it for 2 years. I underlined it, and then I leafed through it every day for 2 years and firmly got this method in my head, and I did it.
Well, certainly, you have given new life to the book. The book has been reprinted many times since.
I've kept that book alive for 30 years.
Wow. Have you read the book?
I have. And I mean, it kind of depends on how you feel about stuff like that. Like I believe in affirmations because I understand the science behind it. And like there is kind of a science behind this idea of controlling your thoughts. And, you know, which is kind of, it's like controlling your thoughts is like trying to catch speeding bullets. So it is a skill that you have to develop. But there is a science to affirmations and to positive thinking in the sense that it has to do with this sort of theory of our own consciousness and right. This idea that you can, that the self that you think of as an integrated singular consciousness is actually multiple different consciousnesses like working at the same time, and the driver just changes, but we don't notice the driver changing, like if that makes sense. And so in a way, by constantly writing out an affirmation or like just really training your thought system to like disrupt negative thinking and create a new framework, that there is a science that over time this works. Like it can't make water out of wine, but a lot of people's inability to achieve success or happiness is not about their inability to make water turn into wine. Their inability to access joy or to achieve confidence is very much just about they're stuck in a specific worldview and they're caught up in certain anxieties that are like on a feedback loop in their brain. And so there is a science to it. So I read it and it was familiar to me. I've read other things like it and I practice affirmations. And when I'm doing it really consistently, things in my life just get fucking better. I don't know why, but they do. And I have a book of like these affirmations and I don't know how it works, but I know it worked for me. So, and it looks like it worked for her. So I think there's absolutely something to positive thinking. I think there's also such thing as toxic positivity. I think that any time that we step back and try to really focus on changing our own behavior, that we will get better results. So however you get into the system, whether it's therapy, whether it's a self-help book, whether it's the Enneagram, whether it's Myers-Briggs, doesn't matter. But like any time that you just focus your energy on trying to control what you can change, which is like who you are and how you feel about things and what you bring to the table, like you're going to have positive results. You know, I don't believe in manifesting because like something without action to back it up is kind of ridiculous. And so this thing is like, I do affirmations, but I also do stuff every single day to get me closer to the things that I want.
To realize that shit. And most of the advice that you've given me over the years, I think, is probably very tangential to all of that. And every time I reach out to you every time I take your advice or reach out to you for it, it always ends well for me.
Oh, that makes me happy.
You are my go-to person for that kind of shit.
Shortly after this, she was hired by the KRW radio station to do ad copy for them based on her unconventional work at Kahn's department store. And to me, I just see that as like everything she does, it becomes this like jumping stone to the next thing and is like giving her the skills to like do the next thing. So when you look back on it, it's almost like you can see like how everything in the universe is like pushing her towards this thing she's gonna eventually achieve. So around this time, she was also starting to home tutor her daughter, Sally, who was having difficulties. It was to no avail. Her daughter was having very real developmental disabilities that could not be fixed with extra attention. Her husband refused to have Sally seen by a professional, however, and Phyllis described it as her life, being in a frustrating situation with no way out and trying to escape it at work by writing catchy, funny jingles. I remember one time I was on set and some guy's like, oh, I just like broke up with my girlfriend. And like everyone on set was like, oh, that's the fucking worst, man. When you have to come in to set and do a sex scene, like when you've just gotten in a fight with your partner, or like everyone just suddenly was like, oh my God, like that's the worst. And so I get it. Cause it's like, there were times when I was going through incredible internal emotional pain. And like the only outlet really was like going and doing stand up at night or something else. Cause it was out of my control, you know?
Soldiering on through work, because at least that at the end of the day means money's coming in. I was at the kink.com armory for a scene, and I remember having to step out between scenes, between cuts, because I had to have a long billable conversation with my divorce attorney. And I tell you what, I have never had a warmer welcome back to set than when I had to get off that phone call. Yeah. Like, everybody was so hey, let's get you a robe. Let's take 5. We're going to order lunch early. Like, I don't remember exactly, but it's just like that kind of shit. When you have to be there and you have to do it, sometimes just being able to distract yourself with the people that are familiar and the tasks that you know is the best thing.
And I think too is the thing is that, like, keep in mind, like, this now is like, we're in the 50s. And this is the time of like the happy homemaker. This is the time of Ozzie and Harriet. Like, this is the time of Leave It to Beaver. Like, no one's talking about not being happy in their marriage. And it seemed to me like she just really thought that everyone's marriage was like this, and like that's what marriage was. Like it seems that at no point did she think what she was going through was like exceptional in any way. And because people weren't talking about marital problems or any of that stuff, so she was also just like blind, you know? I mean, she's naive. And I think that is why a lot of older men target younger women, is just because they just don't know better. They can't recognize when someone's on some fuck shit, you know? Like, when you get to be our age, it's like they can say hi in a certain way and you just know, like, nope, boy, no, trash. Like it can be like the smallest thing, and like we just know that, like, oh no, this person's trash. But, you know, when you're like at this point, you know, she's like in her 30s, like she's got 5 kids. And her only social outlet really is like writing jingles for like radio ads. And like, it's the only thing that she's getting praise for and recognition for. Like, people recognize that she's good at this thing. And so it's kind of the only place where she's feeling emboldened to take chances and get validation, because she's certainly not getting it from her husband.
She eventually worked for other radio stations writing jingles, each getting her closer and closer to the city. She would ride cable cars, buses, and trams to get into the city to work, reading The Magic of Believing over and over again. She was 36 years old with 5 children in an unhappy marriage, but she was still managing to get hired and promoted onto other places, getting her closer and closer to being on radio or television.
So her ad copy started to get weirder and weirder, but it stood out. And this is where, like, the first places we can see her, like, humor. So here, like, one ad starts out: "If you are bothered by an old set, listen to the Dawn Sherwood Show. It sounds just as bad on a brand new set as it does on an old set. It's the only show that gives old set owners an even break." Another one is: "There are no prophets of doom on KSFO. Only the most cheerful news is good enough for KSFO's happy listeners. When the weather reports are bad, KSFO's special Earth contour hot air, cold air expert reevaluates and edits the weather report to make it come out sunny and warmer."
Want heartache? Mildred is crying because young Dr. Jerome removed the wrong kidney. He took Gertrude's kidney out, and it was Stephanie who needed it. Now, if you want to suffer, don't listen to KSFO, because nothing depressing goes on here. KSFO's programs are just the most sweet.
So it's actually kind of quite dark.
Kind of weird.
Like, and I love that for her. Like, it's like she's not writing like a woman. She's writing like a comic. I love that that exists. Like, this is like her first attempt at writing jokes. So the stars really started to align for Phyllis. Back during her days at the department store, a friend had sent her to a place called the Purple Onion, which is a legendary club where a female torch singer and comedian named Jory Remus was headlining. Phyllis went and thought if Jory could do it, she could do it. It was the same acts that Phyllis had been doing when she was in college. So here's a sample of some of Jory Remus's act. So this is at the Purple Onion in the 50s.
I didn't tell you I was writing a book, did I? Well, everyone is writing a book, and so I felt that I should too. My book is a book for women. It's called Men. How to Say No to Them, or What to Do Until the Police Come. It's not exactly a book, it's more of a sort of a pamphlet. And I've done most of the research myself at no small cost. And I really haven't learned awfully much from it, but whatever I've learned, I'm happy to pass on to you.
Women at this time were very blue, by the way. And that kind of gets whitewashed from history. So I'm glad that I was able to get that clip in so you could see that, like, women have actually always been a lot dirtier than men because they can be.
And I think it hits harder because they don't expect it from us. Still.
No.
Fast forward to when Phyllis was working for KSFO, and one night she went to a jazz club and ended up seated next to Lloyd Clark, Jory Remus's drama coach. Clark had also coached Marguerite Johnson, a calypso dancer and singer. He had taught her how to make an entrance and renamed her Maya Angelou. When Phyllis met Clark, she said, "Whoa, you're just the person I'm looking for."
Her life is like this. Like, that's so random. And I feel like that's maybe the thing I believe in affirmations and stuff like that is it's like when you're focusing your energy towards the things you want instead of what's in the way, like things tend to open up for you, you know? So Phyllis asked him to take her on, and he asked if she wrote her own material. She said yeah, and then auditioned for him. He agreed to take her on at a rate of $5 an hour. She couldn't afford that rate, but he agreed to take her on until later when she would make it big. Like, she would pay him back when she was a star. So Phyllis Diller was present at the birth of stand-up comedy as we know it today, in the right place at the right time. Yeah.
That's incredible. Stand-up comedy in the United States can be traced back to the vaudeville and variety show era of the late 19th century. Comedians would perform short, humorous acts as part of these traveling entertainment shows. Stand-up comedy was also a significant component of burlesque and minstrel shows during this time.
So stand-up comedy and sex work have always gone hand in hand. The hosts of burlesque shows were expected to make jokes between acts, and the strippers often added comedy to their routines. This is long before Sam Kinison or Andrew Dice Clay or Howard Stern. Like, comedy grew up next to a pair of titties. Like, they've always been bedfellows. So just throwing that out there. That sex workers were like the original comedians because the burlesque dancers would come out and they would tell jokes as they like took off their gloves. Like, that's why they're so campy. They come in riding a big telephone, you know, like, oh, I could never. Like, they were the first comedians. Like, they would add that coquetry into their art. And then the hosts of the burlesque shows, usually dudes, were also expected to be really funny. So in a lot of ways, that's where like this thing of standing up without accompaniment kind of started, right?
So what about the minstrel shows aspect
I
of it?
didn't look into it, but we all know what a minstrel show is. And it's same principle as a burlesque show. Minstrel show, burlesque show is like the same thing, which it was considered sort of edgy, gross, populist entertainment. And that MCs and hosts at those shows would be expected also to make jokes. And minstrel shows, the whole point was the people were on stage making fun of Black people.
In the early 20th century, comedy clubs began to emerge as dedicated venues for stand-up comedy. These clubs provided a platform for comedians to hone their craft and build audiences. The advent of comedy records and television brought stand-up comedy to a broader audience.
So Phyllis in the early 1950s was situated in exactly the right place at the right time. She describes what it was like in this passage from her memoir. So this is a slice of life of what San Francisco was like as comedy is being born.
During the mid-50s, this Little Italy neighborhood located next to Chinatown was the most exciting part of the city. Packed with an eclectic combination of locals and tourists and pulsating to the music that drifted out of the clubs and bars while cacciatore and puttanesca scents filled the air, North Beach was, in a word, alive. And it also served as a talent magnet and cultural free-for-all during an era dominated by conservative values.
And this is what I really liked about a memoir is it's very self-conscious about these like broader meta things, which I really enjoyed. Yeah, it's a great book. So visitors could come see Mort Saul, at the Hungry Eye and a young singer named Johnny Mathis at Ann's 440. Check out the belly dancers at 12 Adler or the strippers doing their thing in any of the joints along Broadway. Take in some jazz and drag shows at Finocchio's. Attend beat poetry readings at Lawrence Ferlinghetti's City Lights bookstore. Or watch the poets themselves getting sauced at the adjacent Vesuvio Cafe. The diagonal thoroughfare for much of this activity was Columbus Avenue, and there at number 140 in a basement below the sidewalk was the Purple Onion.
Keith Rockwell had opened this tiny venue for Jory Remus after giving up his part ownership in Enrico Bonducci's Hungry Eye, that smoke-filled, hungry intellectual wine cellar whose brick walls served as a backdrop for many of the era's most famous comedians. Jory had performed at the Hungry Eye, and Keith, who was her bass player, absolutely adored her. However, Bonducci didn't think that she was anything special, so Keith had gone across the street and opened the Purple Onion to ensure that she still had a stage.
That's right.
Holy
Probably the most iconic stand-up comedy venue, the Purple Onion. Even Zach Galifianakis' first real big special was live at the Purple Onion. Still there.
Mm-hmm.
The birth of real stand-up comedy, especially like alt comedy, all of this stuff, was built for a female fucking comic. Let it be known. That was built for her. That's fucking cool. Yes. Just wanted to throw that out there. And the whole like women aren't funny, da. Like, yeah, that first club was built for a woman. Because the guy was like,
okay, good. I wanted to get that clean because I'm going to snip that for a promo later, and also just so that I can have it like as a sound on my phone just to play back when I'm feeling stressed out.
So for the next year, Phyllis volunteered to perform anywhere. The Red Cross, churches, you name it. She was cutting her teeth. And so here is her talking about that process.
Should work whenever possible. Audience. What you need is an audience. You're going to learn everything you need to know from the audience. When they laugh, you're a winner. When they don't laugh, you're a loser.
Everyone should be so blunt. That is true. That like the only way to get good is to do it. And the advice I give to people that want to do stand-up is I say like, oh, stand-up is so easy because like you just go up and do it. And whether you bomb or whether you do great, when you get off the stage, you're either going to never want to get on stage again, or you're going to be like, I can't wait to get back up there. Like you'll know right away. And but it's also something you can only know if you do it. I remember the first time I went up, I didn't do well. And instead of getting down and feeling like dejected, my feeling was just like, okay, so next time I go up there, this is what I'm going to do.
You're telling me that Sovereign Syre went into a task for the first time, wasn't immediately perfect at it, and then just was like, well, let me get right in there for next time.
Yeah.
Because that is tough. That's some tough shit to do. That is really,
I mean,
really
especially if you're like us and you have ADHD, like the fear of not being perfect. And if you're not perfect at something right away, it's very difficult to have the discipline to continue to persevere. But I'm also driven largely by pathological confidence and spite. Having been a sex worker, there was no way I was going to not get really fucking good at stand-up because we are the joke. So I wanted to flip that on people. I'm driven by like really petty things like that.
She auditioned at the Purple Onion, but they already had their comic, so that ended in failure. Still, she quit her job at the radio station and told them she was leaving to be an unemployed comic. A few weeks later, the comic at the Purple Onion left for 2 weeks, so they called Phyllis and asked her to come in. She made her professional debut on Monday, March 7th, 1955. She was 37 years old.
Mm-hmm. And that is where we're going to end this week's episode. So next week, we are going to chart like the launch of her career, which is a really unbelievable life and career.
I knew I was going to love this one. Oh man, I didn't expect the tour de force of emotions I would feel while.
I just related to everything in it in terms of like the women often have to delay their dreams. And because of this other stuff. And so many women, you see them on TikTok, you see them on Twitter, I get emails. They're always worried that they're too old. that they're too old to start this or start that. And what I loved about Phyllis's story is she didn't start performing until she was 37 years old. Like, she wasn't a 20-year-old open micer, you know, going on tour. Like, she was a mom of 5 kids with a deadbeat husband and well past what was considered her prime in the 50s. And she did not give a fiddler's fuck. And so I think the story is really inspiring for women to hear. Like, you don't have to give up your dreams just because you turned 30 or 35 or 40 or 45 or 50. One of my favorite poets, Virginia Adair, didn't write her first poetry book till she was in her 80s. You know, like, and that's because women often have to delay our development to take care of family and support husbands that are going through school or going to law school or whatever the fuck they're doing to achieve their dreams. So yeah, but I wanted to really establish, like, this wasn't just like, oh, she was like, you know, a housewife and stumbled into this. It's like, nah, this lady's like whole growing up situation was like very shitty. The marriage was very shit, and she had a lot going on. Keep in mind, she's also got a daughter now that has like developmental delays, and the husband won't let them get like medical treatment. So she's also doing that by herself.
Well, I can't wait for part 2. But in the meantime, we should do some housekeeping. So you can now find us on Patreon.
That's correct. We have Patreon.
Patreon.com/ why don't you take it from there, Sav?
Ill repute.
Is it just ill repute? Okay, I wasn't sure if it was ill repute or ill repute.
We have a link tree, so it's linktr.ee /illreputepod, and that has links to everything. Just everything. And so the link tree for the podcast will be in the show notes, along with all the sources that we use today. Most of this episode and the future episodes are taken from her memoir, because whenever I have the opportunity to take it straight from the horse's mouth, like, that's what I would prefer to do, because I want to analyze her story as she told it, because we're going to get into that tomorrow. We're going to get into that in the next episode as we get into how she talks about her career and her life, that she's made choices in what she's talking about. So, benefits of the Patreon is you get a bonus episode every month. You get the uncensored video of the podcasts. And then you also get access to the Ill Repute Discord, where you can drop a line. You can engage in conversation. You can form community. We will be in there responding. You can ask questions. You can make suggestions of episodes you'd like to see. You can tell us what you like, what you don't like about the pod, all the things. If it's negative, keep that funny. We are both former cam girls. We will kick you out so fast if you're a meanie pants. Critique is fine, but make it funny. But don't come in there and be a troll. You can go to importantadult.com and you can get show merch for the podcast. We'll work on getting that imported over to the Patreon as well, so we can work out a way for patrons to have discounts on the merch. So that is going to take me figuring some stuff out. So just be patient with us as we are building out the Patreon. We will add other tiers as we kind of get the hang of things, but we didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So just right now, think of this as like a really fun tip jar with a little bit of bonus content. And we love every single person that has joined. Like, thank you. Thank you for your support. I'm coming to you from traditional Tongva and Chumash territory in East LA in the Californias. And I come from the Central Valley where the Chukchansi are. So I'll acknowledge them as well. But yeah, the original caretakers and stewards of the land, and very grateful to have this place have been conserved to allow me to be here, for sure.
And I am coming to you from Austin, Texas, which is the historical land of the Tonkawa, Lipan Apache, and Comanche peoples. And we thank them for everything they've done for the land and continue to do as extant cultures, many of them in their own right.